series is called I Quit. Last Sunday we started by talking about we quit complaining. So if you know somebody that complains a lot, send them last week's message. It's posted on our website. Or if you complain a lot, just ask your person sitting next to you, do I complain a lot? Then go back and listen to it. And maybe you came last week and they go, you're still complaining. Go back and listen to it again. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't say. But go back and listen, because if we don't, then complaining will keep us from the plan that God has for our life. Today, though, I'm going to talk about something that really may not seem like it's driving your life, but yet it could be the driving principle behind your life and you don't even realize it. And especially for the men in the room, because we're going to go, yeah, no, I don't have that. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about fear. We're going to talk about overcoming living a life of fear. I quit living in fear. That's what we're going to talk about today, because living in fear will destroy you. Living in fear. Now, what I don't mean is this. I don't mean that fear is all bad, okay? I just want to be clear on that. Some people go, I have no fear. Well, I don't know if you know, but there's a mental condition where people don't have fear at all. That is not good, okay? They do some very stupid things like throw themselves off a building with no parachute and go, I'm not afraid. And you're like, you should be afraid, right? I mean, put my hand on a hot stove. You should be afraid, right? I mean, like there's things that you should feel fear. God gave you that. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is when fear becomes the driving force behind your life. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about idiots running around doing stuff that's just stupid and they should be afraid to do. But what we're talking about is what happens when the fear takes over? What happens when the fear is running your life? And the truth is some of us don't realize that the reason why we do what we do is because of the fears that we have. Now, we might not realize it because some people deal with fears in different ways. But today we're going to kind of unpack that. And the first thing we have to do is kind of identify it. So here's what I want to do. I just want to kind of abbreviate, and I want you to think, before you start thinking about now, I want you to kind of go back to the time when you were a child and think about, did you have any fears? Did you have any weird fears, some funny fears? I don't know, I did. They say, that doctors say, you come into the world with only two fears. One is falling, and the other one is loud sounds. I don't know what that has to do with it. But I have a feeling it's because of the way we come in. We have a lot of people getting ready to have babies, so you'll see they kind of fall out, and so they don't just fall out, but it's kind of traumatic, and so that may be where the fear of falling comes. I don't know, and then loud sounds, I don't know, but anyway, the point is there are the two, and then we learn all the other fears as we get hurt, as we do things, and some of them keep us safe and some things like that, and then some of them become a little bit irrational, but they start to keep us sometimes, and they can kind of drive your life to go, I don't want to do that because I'm afraid. I don't want to do this because I'm afraid, and now I can't live because I'm just living by fear, and I'm letting my fear decide everything that I do. That's what we're talking about. And for me, I'll just be honest, as a child, I've never told anybody this before, until first service, and now I don't know if I should have, but because I got a feeling I'm going to see these things everywhere. But anyway, when I was a kid, when I was 3 years old, my biggest fear, or one of my fears, was Santa Claus. I'm sorry. I'm not anti-Santa Claus or anything like that. It's not a religious thing. It was just, I just did not like the concept of Santa Claus. And if you think about it, it probably makes sense, or maybe it doesn't to you guys, but it did to me, so maybe it's just my warped mind. But for me, it was, your parents tell you, tonight, Santa Claus is coming in a red suit, and when we're all sleeping, okay, he's going to come in, and then he's going to leave, and I didn't even get to the toys. I was just like, I don't want that. I don't want some stranger in the house when you're not, and then I might not be sleeping, and then he's going to come in, and I was really scared of him. And so my mom, being so nice and everything, she said, well, here's the thing. Now, if he don't come, you don't get any toys, And I said, if it means the difference between him coming in or I get toys, I don't want the toys. I mean, that's how scared I was. I mean, you see how irrational that was? I mean, it's weird. I don't know why I was so scared of it. And so they were like, okay, so Santa Claus came to our house and he left the toys outside. So I don't know what that's about, but that's kind of how it was. So anyway, that's what happened in our lives. I don't know what irrational fears you have, but it did keep me from enjoying something, and now I'm pretty good with Santa Claus. So, if you give me Santa Claus, I'm good with it, and I love Santa Claus. But I didn't then, what I'm saying? I still remember that, and I've never shared that with anybody. So anyway, thank you for listening. Anyway, you can give me counsel later on that. But what are you afraid of? What were you afraid of when you were a kid? And then let me ask you a question. What are you afraid of now? You might not have thought about that in a long time, because the problem is that we come up with ways of coping with our fears. Some of us have come up with ways of coping. And one thing is that now I have some different fears. As an adult, I'm afraid of something, but I've learned how to deal with it. And maybe nobody even knows it's a fear because, well, they do know it is, but if you exploit my fear, you're going to get anger. That's my default. My default's anger for everything. And so I get angry about it. I don't like snakes. So if you put a snake around me, I'm going to be mad, you know? And a lot of people have tried to go, oh, I see. So, and I'm only telling you this because sometimes it's hard to identify because you might not realize, especially as a man, you may vent out in anger and not realize the thing you're angry about, you're going, I'm not afraid. No, you are, because what's causing that irrational anger is what? It's fear. And so I've had people that had pet snakes. I don't get it. But anyway, they have pet snakes, and they'd be like, well, I'm just going to put it on you, like they thought it was funny. And I was like, well, you know, in about 2 seconds, we're going to be doing a funeral for your pet snake. Because, I mean, I don't mind killing the snake. I just can't have them around me. So I'm like, they think it's funny. They got a $5,000 boa constrictor, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that might be cool to you, but if he don't stop, his head's going to be removed. You know, okay, so you get the idea. And so just warning you that don't play around with that. You know, like some people, oh, I'm going to put a snake in there or whatever because I might hurt you. I mean, it's irrational, but it does happen. And so we just want to be clear on that. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is this. You might think that fear means that you shrink down, and maybe that's what you do. Or it might be that you vent out. But can I tell you, people that hate, people that do these kinds of things and they hate and they get so angry, a lot of times what's behind it is fear. And the Bible teaches perfect love drives out all fear. And today we're gonna kind of talk through that. But what I want you to do before we go there is I want you to try to identify, what are you afraid of? And I believe it can be, as we become adults, it can be broken down into 4 things. You might have more, so write it on the side if that's not yours. But here's the things that I think you could be afraid of. And just check the mark if you're willing to do that. Or if you're not, that's okay. You might be going, I don't want everybody to see what it is for me. So maybe just take that home and evaluate later. But please evaluate. Because if this is driving your life, it's not going to take you to the place that you want in your life. It's not going to take you to the God-given purpose that God wants for your life if this is what's driving you, okay? So what am I afraid of? One is this, fear of loss. A lot of things can be categorized in that. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose something. I'll lose my job, lose my money, lose my material things, lose my relationships, right? Loss of a loved one, or the ultimate loss, right? When that person's no longer here, that's scary for people, right? Losing my kids, maybe some of us aren't as scared of that. We want them out of the house. You know, it's like, I still want to have them, but not so close. Okay, we get the idea. But fear of loss. Number 2, fear of failure. I'm afraid that I'm going to fail. It makes us scared to try things. Or maybe you tried something and it didn't work out and you messed up and now it's like, I'm afraid to try anything else. Or, the fear of failure can be huge. Maybe somebody was abusive in your life and it's like every time you made a mistake, then they hit you so hard and now you're one of those people that can't be wrong. You know, it's like I have to justify, I can never be wrong, I can never make a mistake, I have to be perfect. And that's kind of sad because honestly, ingenuity, it takes so many failures to come up with the right way. You know, we fail so many times. But the fear of failure can be huge. Fear of rejection, that's another one. I'm afraid that they're going to remove, and maybe you've had people do that. It's like, hey, if I be real, then they're going to remove. They won't be in relationship with me anymore. They won't love me anymore. And I feel like they're going to push me out, and I can't be honest. I can't be truthful. I'm afraid I'm going to be rejected. The last one is the fear of the unknown. I think of a book, when I think of fear of the unknown, there's a book out there called Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know if anybody's ever read that. And that's the kind of books I read. But anyway, and so it's kind of a business book, leadership book, and what they teach is they teach when you're in a cheeseless situation. And so it's an allegory, and it's based on these rats in the maze. I think it's rats or mice. But anyway, rats in the maze. And so what the rats do is they live in this certain part of the maze, and then all of a sudden, there's this dispenser that dispenses cheese, and it just stops. And now they don't know what to do. So they all sit there, and they're all about to die of starvation. And one of them goes, maybe we need to go out into the maze and find more cheese. And the rest of them go, but it's scary in the maze, right? So they'll literally die in place, and that's where a lot of us are, is the fear of the unknown. I'm not going to go out into the maze because where I'm at is less scary than the unknown. No matter what I face here, it's not as scary as what's out there, right? And a lot of us stay in cheeseless situations. Anyway, that's the purpose of the book. But you get the idea. So fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown, that's where a lot of us live. And what I want you to do today is this. I just want you to kind of identify that and say, do you have that in your life? You see, fear is not the lack of faith. Maybe you think it is. That's what we oftentimes think. It's not lack of faith because we have a lot of faith when we fear. It's just in the wrong thing. The fear of What we put our faith in when we fear is what if. That's what we want to do. You can write that down. What if? We got a slide for it. Oh, no, we don't. So, sorry, I got out of line here. So let me tell you what God thinks first, and then we're going to get into what if, okay? 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. The Apostle Paul is writing to Timothy, and he's going to give you God's perspective of fear. And God's perspective of fear is this, 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. I can't even talk today. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That's what God thinks. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't feel afraid, because God is okay with that. But what he's saying is, if fear is driving your life, the spirit of fear, you cannot have the spirit of fear and the power of the Holy Spirit. You cannot have the spirit of fear and have God. You can put your faith in fear, or you can put your faith in God, but you can't have both. If you put your faith in God, you will have power and love and a sound mind. I got to tell you, when you have fear, you'll understand you'll have just the opposite. You will be powerless. You will not have as much power in your life. You will not have love, because the opposite of fear, the opposite of love is not hate. You know what it is? It's fear. In fact, in 1 John, I believe it is, it says, perfect love drives out all fear. Because fear is at the crux of it. You will not have a sound mind. Anybody understand that? When fear is ruling your life, you'll do bizarre things. If you put a snake up here, you would see something very bizarre. You know what I'm saying? But fear of those things makes you become more irrational or more hyped. It's unbelievable what it does in your life. And so what God wants is, he goes, I don't want you to have that spirit of fear. And today we're going to tell you how to do it, but you got to understand where it comes from. And fear, the faith that we put in is this. It's in the what ifs. Now you can write it down. Hopefully you already did it. Fear is placing faith in the what ifs of life. What do I mean? The projection of what's going to happen. And it's very scary for us, right? When you're afraid, no sound mind, you're thinking of all these things that can happen, right? Anybody got those what ifs? What if this happened? What if this happens? What if that happened? What if I have this? And some of them come true and some of them don't, but we have to come to terms with them. And so what I want to do is in fact, Moses, here's what he said about it. Exodus chapter 4 and verse 1, when Moses was called of God through a burning bush, and God did a bunch of stuff to prove to Moses that it was God talking to him. He came to Moses and he said, I want you to go, and I want you to be the deliverer that you've been praying for. And Moses had been praying. And I want you to go, and I want you to say, let my people go, and you're going to deliver them from Egypt to the promised land. Okay, they're no longer going to be slaves. This is going to be a great moment. But instead of celebrating it, here's what Moses did. Moses answered him and said, what if? You want to circle that? What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? What if they reject me? What if they don't believe me? You see, because Moses tried this 40-some years ago before this verse. And they didn't believe him, and he became like a pretender. It was like, I thought I was the deliverer, and then it didn't work out. And now he's had 40 years of going, I shrank back and shrank back and shrank back, and now God's saying, it's you, Moses. And he goes, I want to believe you, but I'm so afraid, because what's at the crux of my life, what's the problem in my life is, I'm afraid I'm going to be found out as being a fraud. Anybody feel that way? And he's saying, what if they don't believe me? Maybe that's where you're at. What if? Two what ifs. Two things that what ifs reveal. Why do what ifs matter? Because the first thing is this is a positive part of it. What you fear reveals what you value most. Does that make sense? What you fear is what you value most. If I was coming at you as an enemy, hopefully we won't be doing that, but if I was, I would try to find out what you value most, and I can tell you that's what you're most afraid of, right? Parent, I love my kid. I'll just give you one example. I don't want to lose my kid, right? I would protect my kid, and to a point, that's good, but here's the thing, is that as it becomes an obsession, what happens? The person who wants to protect them so much, they want to protect them from life, they become the overprotective parent, and now their kid can't live, right, in the real world. They can't live and function because the parent's always right there and won't let them do anything, and eventually the kid has to kind of break away from them, and they're so scared something's going to happen, right? Maybe that's where you're at. But I care about my kid. But see, what I fear reveals what I value most. That's not a bad thing. But here's the bad part. Number two, what you fear also reveals where you trust God the least. You see, the reason why we're fearing and the reason why we go, oh, that's my kid. Oh, I got to protect them. Oh, I can't let them out. Oh, I can't do this thing, is because we're struggling saying, do I trust God with what? What is it I got to trust God with today? What is it that I fear the most? What is the thing that I would put in the blank and say, this is where I'm struggling? And we're not going to like how this sounds, but what I fear reveals where I trust God the least. So let me ask you a question today. And this might take some time to answer. Maybe you already got it on the top of your head. But where do you trust God the least? Where do you need to trust God? What is it in your life? Where do you need to trust God? I'm not trusting God where? In the blank. Where do you not trust God? We got a slide for it. I'm not trusting God with what? Fill that out. Think about that just for a second. And then what I want you to do is maybe take that home and think about it more. Or if you know what it is, if you're going, yeah, this is where it's at for me. If I was to be real honest, if this happened, or maybe this has happened and I'm scared to death and I don't know what to do with this and it's overwhelming your faith, your fear is overwhelming your faith in God, then I want you to write that down. This is what it is. If you want to do it later, that's fine too. But I want you to think about it because here's why I want you to do this. I want you to spend some time evaluating because until you evaluate, here's what the problem's going to be. You're never going to get to the place where you can overcome it until you identify what it is, okay? I want to give you two things today to overcome the what-ifs in your life. Two things to overcome the what-ifs, okay? And you can write down the first one, and then we're gonna look at a person in the Bible who's going to help us with this. So the first thing is this, is what we just talked about. The reason why I want you to do this is this. Until you acknowledge your fear, you're not going to be able to overcome it. Unless you know it's a problem, you're really not going to be able to overcome it in your life. And so you have to at least acknowledge it. You have to admit it. You have to be ruthless about interrogating reality to say, this is real. Because a lot of people will just, I live in a fantasy world. No, I'm not afraid. Oh, no, I'm not afraid. No, that doesn't bother me. I've had people repeat something their dad said to them 60 years ago, and they go, it didn't bother me. I went, man, you can't repeat something I said 5 minutes ago, and you repeated verbatim what he says, and it didn't bother you? You got to ruthlessly interrogate reality, acknowledge that you're afraid of it. That's okay. That's where it starts. And then choose to trust God. This is big, okay? This is the point. Choose to trust God. Facing the what-ifs of fear by what? Acknowledging that I'm afraid and then choosing to trust God. It's a choice. I'm going to tell you what Satan's going to do. He's going to whisper in your ear and go, you have no choice. You're going to see the fear and you're going to go, I don't have any ability to choose, but you do. God said what? I did not give you the spirit of fear. I gave you the spirit of what? Power and love and a sound mind. He doesn't want you to stay in fear. A lot of people are scared of God, but when you see who God is, you don't have to be scared of him. There's the fear of the Lord, which means we respect him. What does that mean? It means that we believe that God is bigger than our problem. That's what it means. That's why Jesus says, hey, why do you be scared of what people can do? Why aren't you afraid of what God can do? Because if you are and you realize God's for you, he can take care of the people in your life, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a story from the life of David. Okay, we talked a little bit about him a few weeks ago and a big mistake that he made in his life. And today what I want to do is I just simply want to explain a little bit of the beginning of David's life and a piece of David's life that maybe you've never heard of. And then we're going to talk about a psalm that he wrote that's really going to try to help us today, okay? 2 psalms that he wrote. All right, so let me tell you about King David in the Bible. You might have heard of him, David that killed Goliath. That's true. Before he killed Goliath, the current king was not a good one, and so the prophet Samuel, God came to the prophet Samuel and said, I want you to go and anoint the next king. The first king of Israel had made a mistake, and God said, I'm going to remove him, and I'm going to make a new king. And I'll tell you who it is when you get there. That's kind of how God works. So he says, go to Jesse's house. Evidently, he knew who Jesse was. And he shows up at Jesse's house, and he says, tell him to bring out all his sons, and when the right one is there, I'll tell you who it is. So they come out, he looks at them, no. And he has all these sons, and he's like, is that all you got? Because I'm not hearing from God. Maybe I'm just not hearing God right or whatever, but I just don't see. It's not the right one. And then finally he goes, oh, yeah, I got one more. You have a lot of kids when you go, yeah, I forgot one. Or maybe David just wasn't a favorite one. He's young, but he's just like, yeah, he's a great kid, but he just doesn't have that kind of potential. That's what I think. That's more what it was. And he brings David in. He's young. He was out in the fields. He was watching the sheep. And he's like, yeah, he's kind of a shepherd boy, but, I got tons of them, so he's not really my favorite. Okay, you get the idea. And so he brings David in, and he's like, that's the one. And what does Samuel do? He goes and he anoints him which is their way of saying, you're going to be the next king. Now, nobody else was there. It seems like a big moment. It was in the life of David, but nobody else was there other than his brothers going, that was weird, right? And then this prophet just leaves. He comes out of the woods, and then he just leaves, and you're like, what was that about? And then nothing. But I got to tell you, God's calling in life often works like that. You all of a sudden realize, I believe God's calling me to this. Well, that don't make sense. I don't have any of these skills. I don't have any of this stuff. I don't have any of this. And that's how it works. And God calls you to something that you're not capable of and don't have any ability to do and don't have any pathway forward. And then all of a sudden, he'll reveal it as you go. So the next thing that happened in the life of David, or the big stone, is as he was a teenager, his brothers were off to war, and he went out there to bring them lunch, and all of a sudden he heard Goliath, who was a giant warrior, who was a champion, that said, hey, if somebody will fight me, we can end the fight right now, and whoever wins, that's who's going to, the other people will be our slaves. And nobody would go out except for David. And David heard it. He's not a warrior. He's never been trained to fight. And he goes out with a slingshot because he had killed a small bear and a small lion. Okay, you get the idea. And so he went out there with a slingshot, and he prays to the Lord, and he kills Goliath. Now, that's when he became known throughout all of Israel. Now, up till then, he was just, Saul's like, we ain't got nothing to lose. Send the teenager out. You know what I mean? He didn't know he was anointed king. He didn't realize that God had anointed him king. And David didn't really think through that lens. He just did an act of faith to say, I believe God could help me. And he goes out and he slays the giant. And at that point, now everybody knows him as what? The giant slayer, right? The king slayer, the giant slayer. That's who he is. And so everywhere he goes, you killed a giant. You killed this person. And they're like, well, great, we want you in the army now. You know what I'm saying? And so they did. And he went out and he killed other giants, believe it or not. And he had people on his team that killed giants. If you want to get giant killers, kill a giant. And a lot of giant killers will come around you, see? And so David had all these people around him, and he was starting to do that. And then also David was very gifted. So he wrote many of the Psalms in the Bible. He's an amazing writer and artistic. So he was like this artist poet, and he played. And so he played the harp. And King Saul was vexed because he had turned his heart away from God. He would confess his sins, but he never repented for his sins. And so these demons would come and just vex Saul. Maybe you've had that in your life where it's like in the darkness and all this, he just had all these fears. And he became a crazy person where 1 second he'd be fine. Maybe you've lived with somebody like this. And the next second he would become extremely abusive. And so he had David there, and it would calm him when he played his harp. And then he would turn on David and hurt him, and you're like, what are you doing? And then he tried to kill him. And then he found out he was going to be the future king, and he was like, I really want to kill you. And no, I don't. And I love you. I don't love you. That kind of thing. You ever been around a person like that? And it strikes fear like you can't believe, because you never know. It's like one thing when you go, you're my enemy. But then one day you're real nice, and the next day it's like, and you're like, what do I do with that? And it's the trauma that goes on in your head. And that's where David was at. And eventually he had to flee the kingdom as Saul was trying to kill him. He's anointed king, and it's been a long time. And he's been waiting on God. And he's like, how is this going to work? Because this guy's trying to kill me. And now you got the king after you. You understand what I'm saying? Think about even in our society. If the president of the United States was after you, think what you will of him. And he's got the entire army. He's got all the nuclear weapons. He's got the Secret Service. Would you be afraid? You should be, right? And you flee. And you're running, and now you're not in your country anymore. That's where David was. And he was out by himself with nobody to support him. And the king is jealous. Saul has killed his thousands, that's what they would sing. And David has killed his tens of thousands. And some of us, that's right where we are as you get older. You're starting to let these other guys are getting better, and you're going, I'm getting older, and it was really bothering Saul. And so he was after David to kill him, and then he wasn't after to kill him. And it was just a really weird time. If you want to read about it, 1 Samuel 19 all the way through the end, which is 1 Samuel 31, I believe. And so if you read that account, it's absolutely amazing what happens in the life of David during that season. And where we find David at in 1 Samuel chapter 21 is David is running from Saul, and he runs to, guess where he goes? This has been a long time after he killed Goliath. He goes to the Philistines. And when he's in the Philistines, they grab him and they go, we know who you are, and where's your people? They thought it was like a sabotage. And they bring him before the king of the Philistines, and he says, what are you doing here? And then they're thinking about killing him. They're like, we have the giant killer right here. And they were kind of nervous because they're like, he might try to kill us. And then they realized he's not going to kill anybody. And then you know what he did? It says he acted like a madman. I'm not so sure he acted. I think he had lost it. I don't have my home. I don't have my stuff. I don't have anything. And he's there. And in 1 Samuel chapter 21, it says that down his beard, he just let saliva just run down his beard, so he just looked crazy. Maybe you've never read that part of the Bible, huh? We don't like to talk about that because that's a bad moment in somebody's life. He's super scared in that moment of his life. And then later, he leaves. They kick him out. They're just like, well, just let him go. We don't even want to kill him. We don't want to kill this. This is the giant slayer? Just leave, right? How low are you at that point where your enemies are just going, I don't even want to kill you. You're so bad off. You're irrelevant. You're alone. You're all by yourself. You're so afraid. And he ends up in the middle of nowhere in this place called the Hills of Adullam. And he stays there all by himself. And that's where he writes Psalms 56. It's called a golden psalm, I believe. And I think because it's gold, it could be gold for your life. Psalms 56 says this, Psalms 56:1. He says, be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day they press their attack. The Philistines are after me. The king is after me. My brothers in Israel are after me. You know what that feels like? Falsely accused. This isn't right. I didn't do anything wrong. I did the right thing, and I'm being punished for it. You ever felt that way? Be merciful to me, God. Verse 2, my adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride, many are attacking me. In their pride. See, they feel like they're so great. You don't miss that. Because maybe you got somebody attacking you today. Maybe your fear is, this person's getting me. I don't know what to do about this. Maybe it's at your work and they're getting you and you don't know what to do and you don't know that God has a plan, but God has a plan. Verse 3, here's the answer. When I am afraid. Can I tell you what that means? Not if I am afraid. He's admitting that he's afraid. That's why I said, acknowledge your fear. Admit it. If you can't admit it, you're never going to overcome it. If you're living in some weird reality, and a lot of Christians do that, oh, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid. But if you are, don't say you're not. That's not what faith is. Faith isn't you saying something that's not true. It's ruthlessly interrogating reality and saying, this is true, I'm afraid, and I have every right to be because the king of Israel is after me. I have every right to be because you don't know what's going on in my life, right? Maybe that's where you are. What will you do? I will put my trust in you. Choose to trust God. I acknowledge my fear, but I put my trust in God. I take my eyes off of my fear and I put my faith in God. I don't put my faith in fear, I put my faith in God, and it's a choice. And Satan wants to tell you, you have no choice, but you have a choice. You can put your faith in God. He goes on to say, in God whose word I praise, in God I trust. That's what we used to say as a country, didn't we? In God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? What can people do to me? If God is for me, who can be against me? You see what he's doing? He's working himself up to, I'm in this position, God, and he's saying it, but it wasn't a rant. He's not praying without faith. What he's doing is he's changing his faith because why? Because God didn't give us the spirit of fear. He gave us the spirit of power and love and a sound mind. And he's coming back to it by refocusing his life on God, not on his fear. And some of us are focused so much on our fear. Now, I want to tell you how the story ends for David because it might help you a little bit. He goes out to the hills of Adullam in the middle of nowhere. If you've been to Adullam, you wouldn't know you've been to Adullam, okay? And while he's in Adullam, you know what happens to him? All of a sudden, some men show up. Now, these are not the kind of men that you would normally like. These are thugs. These are gangsters. These are outlaws. These are people with mental issues, like, they probably killed people and done things, and they're outcasts. And they start just collecting around David. Can I tell you the closest thing to it is New Branch Community Church. Sorry. And they're out in the middle of nowhere, like Zuni. You didn't think you knew I was going to work that in, right? They're out in the middle of nowhere, and they've collected and they've done bad things. And I don't mean you guys probably aren't thugs and gangsters and stuff, but what do you think? Broken and unconnected, and people that are alone, and they're coming to David, and he's first thinking, wait a minute, I'm going to be the future king of. These are not the type people I should be around. But let me tell you what God did in the hills of Adullam. He created the greatest warriors the world has ever seen for the greatest king next to Jesus Christ. David has been the greatest king to ever sit on the throne of Israel. It is known as the house of David. When they talk about Jesus, he's in the line of David. David became the greatest king of Israel, but you know who was beside him through everything? Good and bad and indifferent was the people that God collected in the hills of Adullam, the people that live out in Zunai. You didn't think nothing good could come, right? But he brought the great warriors. He gave them a second chance. He gave them a second shot, and they overcame their fear, and they became what God intended him to be, which was the greatest king that's ever lived besides Jesus Christ on planet Earth. That's how he makes a champion. Maybe you didn't know it. In your fear. But at first, why did he allow it? Because he could have just told David, no. Because what he needed was, I need you to be afraid so that you will learn that it's not about what you know. You see, this is not conceptual, this is relational. Really important. You might want to write it down. Conceptual, it's not conceptual. It's not about you understanding. You see, a lot of you are waiting on God to teach you and show you, and if God told me, then I'll trust him. That's not how it works. You trust in God, and he'll take care of you. See, David couldn't see the clear path. God could. And he's going, I will make my champion in this process. And he became the greatest king. Absolutely awesome. But can I tell you why he's a man after God's own heart? Right here. Why? Because when I'm afraid, I put my trust in God. I acknowledge my fear. And then what did God do for him? He gave him this power and love and a sound mind. It's absolutely awesome what he did for him. See? And I want to make sure you got that today because it's huge in your life. I got to tell you, it's been huge in my life. I thought about talking about you guys today because it's much easier talking about you than me. And I got lots of examples from you guys, but I won't do that to you, okay? I'll just share some things from me when I was afraid, okay? I'll share a couple of them. I've had some fears in my life. The first one, I'm not doing them in any order, but it's just probably the biggest one in my life. The one doesn't really make sense, and you might not think it. It had to do with anger, which has to do with forgiveness. And some people had done some really bad things to us, and I hated them. And I remember going to church and hearing people say, well, you got to forgive, and God wants you to forgive. And I said, I'm not going to forgive. God might forgive, and I'm cool with that, but I'm not forgiven ever. You can't be right with God if you do that. I don't care. I don't want to forgive. Because what I thought it meant to forgive was this. Here's what the fear is. See, if you're angry today, more than likely you're afraid. And the fear for the angry person is this. They're going to get by with it. You see, if I forgive, it means it doesn't matter. And finally, somebody explained to me, and finally the Word of God explained to me, it says, no. It isn't that they get by with it. You see, if you're forgiving, it means there was something done wrong. And it doesn't mean that you're reconciling. What it means is you're letting go of all that hate. Because you're drinking that poison every day, and it's not killing them, it's killing you. Some of these people aren't even here anymore. Some of them have died. And you know what I learned? One of them died really terribly, and I felt nothing. I thought I'd feel better. Oh, they're not on planet Earth anymore. Oh, great. No, nothing. I still so angry. Still had such a grasp on my life. And you know what I had to learn? I had to learn it's not about that, but it's about saying, hey, I got to let go of that stuff to God. Let God deal with your hate. Let God deal with your anger. And I'm going to tell you, as you go, I'm afraid. I'm afraid if I let that go. In fact, that's all that I am. So if I give up my hate, who am I? I have no life other than that. You know what I mean? That's all that I am. You know what I found? You are more than that if you put your faith and trust in God. Okay, that was one of them for me. The other one that I had was I was afraid, and sometimes even you never get over everything. I was afraid to tell the truth. That's bad as a pastor. I couldn't figure out why. I went to get some counsel for it and different things because I couldn't figure out why am I having such a hard time saying it like it is. And it kind of came back to one thing that I did tell somebody a hard truth once, and they tried to kill themselves. And I was like, I don't want to do that again. Maybe that's where you're at. And I had a hard time with reality. I can't tell the truth because, and then you start making excuses for why I can't say the truth because if I tell the truth, it hurts people. You know what I'm saying? And so you had to come, and yes, there's ways of saying things, and yes, there's ways of doing things, but the truth is that until you come to terms with that, you go, hey, no, I'm not responsible for what other people do. When I am afraid, I put my trust in God. You have to learn that. I'll give you one more because maybe this is where a lot of people are. With my finances. That might seem like a strange one after the other two, but I accumulated a whole bunch of debt in my life. mostly because I was living by some very not godly principles with my finances. And then the problem was, it wasn't that I didn't know, it's that once I got there, then I started making worse choices. Anybody ever done that? And so I tried to cover up debt by more debt because I didn't want anyone to know I was struggling. So how are you doing? I'm doing great. And in some ways, I really believed it for a while. But on behind the scenes was turmoil and horribleness. And I don't want anybody to ever see that. And a really bad day in my life was when this world that nobody knew about collided with everybody else. And I was like, they're going to know. That was the worst day for me. You know, it wasn't bad that I was living under these conditions. It wasn't bad when we were eating ramen noodles. It was bad when everybody knew it. Fear. I don't want to be found out. I don't want people to know that about me. I don't want that. I want to be by myself. But through that, as acknowledging the fear and allowing somebody to come in my life and speak godly principles into my life, it allowed us to overcome this horrible thing in our lives. That's what I learned. That's when I learned what church was really all about. Church wasn't about this. It was about connecting to people and allowing yourself to be vulnerable for the first time and taking your mask off and being vulnerable. And when I'm afraid, you learn to put your trust in God. I'll give you a verse of scripture. You can look it up for yourself. It's one of my favorites in all the Bible. It's Matthew chapter 14. And because I've went over it many, many times, a lot of you guys have heard this story, then I'll just make it really fast, okay? Jesus had sent his disciples out on a boat, and this big storm came up. Have you heard this story before? and so he comes out walking on the water of this storm, and they're very scared, but Peter says, come out, and so Peter comes out of the boat, and he gets to walk on the water too. It's a really cool story, if you've never heard it. And so as he's walking on the storm, he's really excited at first, but then he looks at the storm, and he starts to sink, and Jesus grabs him, and I believe that he whispers in his ear. Now, when you read the story in Matthew 14, a lot of people teach it like Jesus is rebuking him like really angry. That's not what I think. I think it's a whisper that says, why did you doubt? Can I tell you why he doubted? Because he was focused on his fear. He was focused on the storm. And Jesus is pointing out that. You see, what I want you to think about today, the whole story of that, why he shared it with us, I believe, is this, because he shares it more than one time, and he says the same thing to them. But here's what I believe. I think what he's saying is this, is what are you afraid of? Acknowledge your fear. And imagine that Jesus Christ is walking on the thing that you feared the most. By the way, in that moment, they feared the storm the most because it was going to kill him. It was going to kill Peter. I don't know that he knew how to swim. Yeah. I'm afraid. I know. I got you. I'm with you. I put my faith and trust in God. You get it? Imagine what you're afraid of. Imagine Jesus walking on it, and imagine you trusting God instead of being afraid. You see what trust is? Trust isn't you understanding. Oh, be clear. Some of us are too analytical, and we think it's about God telling us what he's going to do. No, it isn't. Faith is this. It's taking my eyes off of that fear and putting it on Jesus. And when you do that, all of a sudden your life is going to be amazing. That's what David is teaching here. And that's what we need in our lives. The first thing you got to do if you want to overcome your fear, if you don't want to live under fear anymore, if you don't want to be a slave to fear anymore, is you got to acknowledge your fear and choose to trust God. Okay? Number two. The second thing is this: seek God until he takes away your fear. You see, some of us go, well, I prayed to God. Yeah, I know, but you didn't pray right. And you only prayed once. Okay? God doesn't want you to be afraid. Can I say it again? God did not give you the spirit of fear. So if you are afraid, it didn't come from God. You can be afraid of God, which means if God is for you, you don't have to be petrified, but you know he's bigger than your problem. But the problem is this: you got to seek God. It says in another place, knock and the door will be open. Seek and you will find. The same thing is Psalms chapter 34. Psalms chapter 34, David writes, it's the exact same time in his life. Psalms 34 and Psalms 56 were written in this period of David's life. Okay. Psalms 34, verse 4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from all my fears. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from all my fears. If you seek him, you will find him. If you go to him, you will find him. You know, it doesn't work when you're in doubt. That's why Jesus said, there's a reason why I gave you these verses. Go back and read Matthew 14. He said, why did you doubt? You see in the book of James, it says, you know why you don't have? Because you don't ask. You know, well, you still ask and you still don't have because you doubt. You see, you're not focused on God, you're ranting at God. God, how could you let this happen? Why aren't you answering this prayer? Because you have no faith. And he's saying, if you have faith, if you take your faith off of your fear and put it onto God, I will do it. I will help you with it. I will be with you. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. I want to give you a few scriptures to take with you today. One is this, Romans chapter 8. We talked about it last week, but I just want to read it for you really quickly, and you can go back and read it for yourself, okay? Romans chapter 8 and verse 35 says this, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake, we face danger all day long. We are considered as sheep going to the slaughter. And then he says, no. He's thinking about his fear. He's acknowledging the fear. And then right in the middle of it, he just says, no. And last Sunday we talked about that when complaining. We said, hey, get one of these bracelets. And every time you go through the day, before you say something, just snap it. And somebody called me this week and said, I got all these welts. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, I've just been snapping about complaining. I was like, don't do that, all right? But maybe get you a rubber band or get you one of these bracelets, and throughout the day when you're afraid, look at that bracelet and just snap it. And you know what you got to say? No. Why? No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither things present nor things future, nor any powers, nor height nor depth, nor Republicans, nor Democrats, nor politics, right? Nor job loss, nor death, nor any other thing in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Can I say it again? Perfect love drives out all fear. God did not give you the spirit of fear. He gave you power and love and a sound mind. And some of us are so afraid and we're living by our fears. And today is the day that you might not get over it, but you can start the process by saying, I'm afraid of this, and God will have room to work in your life. It's going to be absolutely amazing. You have no idea what you're about to embark on when God can remove your fears and start to live for him. It's going to be absolutely amazing for your life. So here's what I want to do. I just want to end with one verse, okay? It's Isaiah chapter 41. And I want us to get this verse today more than anything else. I want you to memorize this verse today more than anything else. I want you to get it. I've been reading the book of Isaiah in my quiet time. I'm a very slow reader. I've had to come to terms with that in my life. I can only read one verse a day or one chapter a day. I don't get it. So I've just come to terms with it. So for the last 66 days, I've been reading the book of Isaiah. That's how many chapters I have. A lot of chapters. So powerful. But I came across this, and it says this. So do not fear, for I am with you. Could you underline that? I am with you. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Every time you're afraid, every time you have a problem, every time in life, when you wake up in the morning, I want you to read this verse because it is to you. Now, I got a feeling there's some people that are too theological for their own good. And they're going to say the book of Isaiah was written to the nation of Israel, and that is true. And there are promises in the book of Isaiah that are not to us. They're just for the nation of Israel. But I believe this one is for us, and I'm going to tell you why, okay? I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. It is for them. It is for us. And I'm going to tell you why it's for us. Because of Jesus Christ and some things that he said and some things that he did, it applies to this verse. And if you don't get it, you're never going to have the power I believe God wants for your life. Because if you just read that and went, yeah, I heard it, then you don't get it. And you have no idea the power that's going to be unleashed in your life if you ever get this, if you ever understand this. The one thing I want you to see is this. I want you to circle every time in the Bible you see that God says, I am. I am, I am, I am. Do you know what that means? Can I tell you what it means? When we were talking about Moses earlier, Moses said, I'm scared to go because they're not going to believe me. And he said, well, then who do I tell them sent me? Because I don't know your name. And he said, you tell them I am sent you. Who was and is to come, God. That's what I am means. See, you don't realize when he says, I am with you. I am. That same God. See, I am that I am. I am your God. That's who he's talking about. You see, God has many names, and you need to know those names. And I'm going to tell you those names in just a second. But before I do, I want to tell you what Jesus has to do with that. Jesus Christ is not just a God. He's not just the little Son of God. He is the Son of God who was with him from the beginning. He is I am. He was the one in the burning bush who spoke, and Moses heard him. That's Jesus. He is Yahweh. And Jesus came, and let me tell you what Jesus did so you make sure you get it today. Jesus came and he died on the cross for the sins of the world. And he rose from the dead. to prove that he has power over death, hell, and the grave. And in that moment, he says, what I'm willing to do is I'm willing to offer my forgiveness of all sins from what I did on the cross. If you accept me, I will offer you forgiveness, and I'll help you forgive. That's big too. Don't miss that. And he says, I will be with you, and I will rise from the dead, and I'll offer you resurrection power. In the book of Ephesians, it says the same power that was exerted to raise Christ from the dead is available for you, is available to you to live and to fulfill God's purpose for your life. That's what it says in Ephesians. But maybe you wonder, what did Jesus do after that? Can I tell you what he did? He ascended into heaven. Maybe you never thought about this part. Where is Jesus now? He didn't disappear. He went for a specific mission that has to do with this verse. Jesus ascended back into heaven. Maybe you didn't know that. He spent 40 days on the earth so people could see him. And they were eyewitness testimonies of people that died saying that we believed, that we saw Jesus Christ. And Jesus then went to the Mount of Olives with his disciples. And before he ascended, he said, I want you to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then he said, and I'm with you always to the very end of the age. I am with you. I am with you. You're not hearing it. You're not hearing it. See, I am with you, but you don't understand where he went. You see, until you understand this, you're never going to get the faith that God wants you to have in this. That's why I know. Some of you guys, I don't think you get it yet, but you're about to, and it's going to change your life. When he ascended back into heaven, and you know where he went? He sits down at the right hand of the throne of God. Maybe you never thought of that. What is he doing there? Why is he sitting? You know why he's sitting? Because he's finished. He finished the work of atonement, and now he makes intercession for us. That's why I tell you this verse has to do with us. The right hand of God. Do you know what the right hand of God means? A king's right hand is the most powerful position in the entire world. And the position of the King of Kings is the most powerful position. And that's where Jesus sits to make intercession for you. And there's times that Jesus doesn't sit. Did you know that? There's a place in the book of Acts, if you want to read about it, where this guy named Stephen was getting ready to be stoned to death, and he wouldn't recant his faith, and they picked up the stones to stone him. And right before he did, he looked up, and God opened up the heavens, and he said, I see Jesus. But he wasn't sitting. He was standing. I see Jesus standing at the right hand of God. That's for you. The right hand of God. Do not be afraid, because I am with you. See, God has many names. I'll give you just a few of them today. His name is Elohim, which means God. His name is Adonai, which means Lord. His name is Jehovah Yahweh, which means God's divine salvation. His name is Jehovah Mokadishim, which means the Lord thy sanctifier. Jehovah Rohi, the Lord is shepherd. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is present. Jehovah Rapha, the Lord is healer. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Jehovah Nisi, the Lord our banner. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. El Shaddai, which means God Almighty. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, who was and is to come. He is the great I am. Oh, and he has one other name. He will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. If you follow Jesus, you don't have the right to be afraid. Because he's with you. Not because bad things won't happen. Because he's with you. He will uphold you with his righteous right hand. The Father will uphold you because Jesus is sitting there and he's standing in this moment. I believe it. If you were to look up to heaven and he actually were to open it at this moment and you're scared to death about whatever it is that's going on in your life, he would open up the heavens and you would see Jesus standing there saying, I've got you. I got a plan for that for your life. Let me help you. And I think he would change your what ifs. He would say, hey, you know what? Stop asking what if this and what if that in fear. Start asking what ifs in faith. What if you gave your life to God? What if God could do a miracle so big it would change your life? What if it wasn't so big? What if it was just a little bit small, like a postcard that I'm afraid to mail out and didn't think that it could change a life? Yet person after person we've baptized, person after person that wouldn't be here, person after person we've seen it change their life. Oh, but this is a small church. This is the hills of Adullam. This is Zuni. I am with you. You need that today? Embrace it and see what God can do in your life. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you. If you need some time to fill